Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Addicted to Books. I'm your host YA, and in today's episode, I'm going to finish up on the summary of the challenge for Africa. If you check on my last episode, I did a summary on this book. It's a book by Wangari Maathai. I just gave an intro, and I also covered the first chapter. Sorry, the first chapter. For today's episode, I'm going to continue from chapter 2 till chapter 15. Since it's a very broad book, I'm not going to dive into detail. I'll just give you basic points she spoke of in the book. The second chapter is called A Legacy of Wars. And here she basically talks of leadership, that is the African leadership after colonialism. A lot of countries were able to attain independence, especially after 1960, with Ghana getting in 1956. And this came about after the World War II, where African soldiers who were coming back to Africa, they had fought in the war and their minds were more opened, so they came back with the idea of guerrilla, and they were able to group and fight for their independence in many African states. But Wangari talks about how many African leaders were treating their citizens so poorly after colonialism. She talks of the OAU, which is currently known as the African Union, and it was formed with the goals of decolonizing the entire continent, to promote unity and to effect economic and social development in order to rid Africa of ignorance, disease, and poverty. She explains that some of the effects of colonialism are the destruction of political and cultural heritage, and basically this is just the lack of knowledge, because before colonialism, African communities had their own political system, they had their own African pride, and they knew their cultural heritage. But with the coming of colonialism, this is something that was majorly lost, because there was introduction of European kind of government rule, and also religion, that is Christianity. You found that the African religions and the form of governments were pushed to the side. They were considered to be backwards. She explains that even though African states are civilized, most were vulnerable to European powers because of some of the following factors. We have greed from slave traders and African leaders. We have the products from Industrial Revolution that really enticed them. And also we have the advances of Western medicine. It was more superior to the ones that we had in Africa. And we also have the power, knowledge, and skills displayed by the European masters. We also have transportation, that is like the train. They were more developed than the ones for Africans. And the most powerful thing was the gun. And this really enticed, or rather really made a lot of the African community to submit. She explains that we have the promise of heaven, which resulted in an attitude which led to people believe that they will be saved by outside forces instead of their own actions. So basically, the fact that when Christianity came to African, they were being taught, or that they were being told about heaven, where there are no troubles, there is no suffering. It's led to an attitude where Africans, or rather just many people, instead of focusing on finding solutions for their problems now, they get this attitude where they just chill, and because they know at the end they're going to get a better life, that is in heaven or whatever paradise. And she gives one example of the Maasai people, that is of Kenya. They were able to maintain their cultures since they didn't accept the ideas presented to them. When the Maasai Okay, so because the Maasai, they were basically in Nairobi, and they were pushed out of that, and they were still able to maintain their culture and their heritage. And she also explains that for African culture, foreigners know more than Africans know themselves. So even in colonialism, Africans did lose a lot of their culture, that is their history, because our culture was passed on by word of mouth. And if you check on most of the books written on Africa, you'll find that most of them are written by foreigners. Very few very few content on African history is written by Africans themselves. So she explains that leaders should consider that African cultural values are still relevant in today's world, meaning uh, meaning Africans should try to see how they can include the African culture in today's world, because little of African culture is given attention to, while others are glorified and embraced rather quickly. So our chapter 3 is titled Pillars of Good Governance. And here she's still talking about the state of the government in African communities after independence. This is where she talks from the coups that took place to the growth. She talks of the three-legged stool. Basically, this is just a stool which has three legs. You can Google the picture and see how it looks like. And she says the three-legged stool represents the government of the African state, and where it consists of the democratic space where the human rights are respected, and we have the sustainable and accountable management of natural resources for everyone, that is the people in the now and those in the future. And finally, we have where we promote the cultures of peace, fairness, respect, compassion, forgiveness, and justice. She explains that these three features they reinforce each other. She talks of where a lot of countries after independence we had coups, where we had the European powers funding certain things like coups and assassinations of various leaders. And she goes on to list some of the important leaders we had, that is like Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba. So that is what chapter 3 consists of majorly. And when you go to chapter 4, it's titled AIDS and Dependence Syndrome. Here, it starts off by her explaining that development success isn't always about money. Where, after independence, Africans did receive a lot of aid, and instead of this aid leading to growth, it has created a culture of dependency. So she talks of 5 millennial goals, and these are cultural inputs and investment in basic health, improvement in education, more efficient and regular transportation services, power and communication, and finally, provision and clean drinking water and proper sanitation. So she goes on to talk about the image of Africa, where African is often portrayed as a helpless victim of her own making. So she gives a simple example where if you check on if you check on magazines or even brochures that are promoted by certain organizations, you will find that it's usually showing an emaciated child. So this just promotes stereotyping. And in chapter 5, she still goes on to talk about the indebtedness and the unfair trade that Africa goes through. And chapter 6 is on leadership. She talks of leaders who actually try to bring change, leaders who were working for the people, leaders who were not corrupt, who did not take bribes, who did not steal money from funding to make a quick penny. And she explains that by doing this, we fail ourselves and also our future generations. And everyone should fight greed and corruption, and we should focus on putting the people first. She explains that we need to encourage a culture of peace, we need to fight corruption, we need to promote integrity, and finally, we need to promote good governance. So after chapter 6, she goes on to talk about culture, the crisis of national identity. She goes on to talk about embracing micronations, land ownership, the environment, saving the Congo, and finally, the African family. So here, when it comes to the African culture, like I said before, through events like the slave trade, colonialism, and just the movement all around, the African culture has been greatly lost and distorted. And you may find that even if you Google more on African culture, you may find that it's on foreigners. And this means some of the facts may be distorted or even changed. So that is something that that Africans should try to restore, and we should try to embrace whatever we know so far. And she also talks of, us not having that, African pride and embracing our micronations. So our micronations are basically tribes. So if you Google more on African tribes, you'd find that there are many of them. So she terms them as micronations, where there are conflicts, especially when it comes to political instability. You may find that it's a micronation conflict. And she also talks of, land ownership, where she talks of how land was owned before colonialism and also how land is owned now. And before colonialism, land was for the people and everyone in the community was catered to. But for now, it's more all private owned, and you might find a lot of people do not have land, and there's so much land grabbing. And Wangari also talks of caring for the environment, how we can protect the environment. Right now we have so many issues of global warming and climate change, and she offers various strategies that we can take. It's not just about planting trees, although yes, planting trees do help, but people will need to understand that how the farming practices, how they dispose of garbage, everything that they do, the manufacturing processes, they really need to take care of the environment. So, and she talks of that. She also talks of saving the Congo, the practices that happen around the Congo, that when it comes to the companies, logging companies, the villagers, the common people. And finally, she talks of the African family. So basically, the book is quite insightful. And while the book came out a long time ago in 2009, I still think there's a lot of things that we can learn from this book that are still applicable right now in our time. And I do encourage people to pick it up, read, or even listen to the audiobook. It's a book which you just read, basically you take your time reading so that you can understand what she's saying. And Wangari was quite phenomenal. And that's a quick summary of the book. So thanks for listening, and until next time, stay safe.